interventions. So this is a paper co-authored with Sawan, who's also here, who's going to present a part of the presentation, and Professor Anindya Chakravarti from IIM Ahmedabad. So this is a work in progress. We've been working at it, chipping away at it for some time. So we have a lot of people who've sort of advised us and guided us along the way, and we presented it in a few places already. So and we're really happy that CPHS seminar series is given us the opportunity to present here. So I'll just quickly sort of summarize what we're going to do. So the broad question we're asking is, do households of different wealth levels respond differently to government interventions? So we're doing this by studying two sort of simultaneous programs in Telangana, India. One is a property rights verification program, and another is an unconditional cash transfer for agricultural landowners. Right. So the first scheme is, which we'll get to later, but it's called the Land Records Updation Program, and the second one is the Raitu Bandhu, agricultural transfers program. So intuitively one would expect a few things to happen, and one of them is, of course, that with a transfer of cash, one would expect people to, beneficiaries to, show some increase in consumption expenditure. And the other thing that one expects is that with landowners getting money, isn't it that agricultural laborers who are dependent on landowners for employment would also probably see some improvements in consumption because of various increases in employment or some other form of transfer. So these are the indirect effects that one expects. So this is what one enters this study expecting. So what are the methods we use? We sort of we'll explain in more detail what this natural experiment design we are following is. But basically, we're looking at how Telangana state was a state which had this scheme, and all the neighboring states did not have a comparable cash transfer scheme or a property rights verification scheme of this scale. So we're exploiting the difference between Telangana's border districts and the border districts along in the other neighboring states. Right. So just to give you a summary of the findings that we have. We find that small and marginal farmers who are they only sell an occasional surplus to the market and it's largely for self-production are the ones who respond the most. This is in comparison to, say, larger organized farmers. So they basically consume more as a result of the program, and also they've changed the way they borrow. They seem to shift to more formal sources of borrowing. The other sort of effect that we find is that the landless agricultural laborers, the intuition that we had that there should be some improvement in their consumption expenditure as well, is something that we don't find. So there's no trickle down, as it were. And the other thing that we find is that when policies are announced, certain anticipation, certain expectations are created among potential beneficiaries, and we find that effect didn't really play out. There was no response to the announcements themselves, but the implementation, of course, did have effects. So this is just a quick sort of overview of what we're going to talk about. So yeah, and I'll split all this into sections, and then Sawan also will present a part of this later. So government interventions generally are broad based. There's a lot of ambiguity about who will potentially benefit, and even though there may be some understanding of who ought to benefit, it's very difficult to actually sort of very clearly target who you want to provide cash transfers to, or how do you do that. And so there's a lot of debate about how this should be done, ought to be done, things like that. So and we are looking at sort of an odd case. In most cases we have either a poverty indicator or some sort of targeting mechanism. But here it's the amount of land that one owns. So which is something unique to Telangana, because most governments don't know how much land citizens own, right? But once there was a scheme to sort of extract this information and centralize it, they've been able to use that to sort of use that as a targeting mechanism. And this is again odd because land itself is something that not everybody has. So we should remember that the group that's being benefited out of these cash transfers is not the poorest in society. It's people with some degree of land, even if small in most cases. So yeah, so we are using a natural experiment designed to try and show this. We have, in some way, two treatments. One is a property rights assurance updation kind of a scheme, and the unconditional cash transfer that we'll explain all this in coming. So the literature that we are sort of engaging with here is, first of all, it's a very dense literature. There's a lot of work that goes on in cash transfers and public policy of this kind. So, one is work that just looks at, how do households respond to cash transfers. So there's some literature on how anticipation effects matter in certain conditions, in certain contexts, and how they don't really play out in certain others. And of course, how people eventually spend the cash transfer. Do they use it productively, not productively? Do they what do they do with the money they receive? And the other, of course, is how do governments design these programs? How do they decide who to provide transfers to? And also, what makes certain government announcements very credible and some others not as credible as some others? So this is the kind of literature that we partly talk about. And the other thing is the property rights development and their effects. So property rights is an important thing in terms of especially agriculture investment. So if there's a say a fresh assignment in property rights, there is evidence that provides some amount of confidence to people to invest in agriculture and improve productivity, for instance. And the other thing that happens is with new property rights or documents, you can avail credit. So that's another literature that we sort of engage with. And even in the Telangana case, it's not exactly fresh property rights, but some sort of a renewed assurance on property rights with new passbooks being issued, which we'll come to later. So, and the other thing is we're looking at cash transfer and targeting, which is again, in this case as well, it's unconditional cash transfers. So even in Telangana, there's no condition on how that money is spent. Nobody's going to verify what happens to the transfer that you receive. So that's another debatable thing that's been talked about in the literature, and we sort of try and speak to some of this. So just to give a sense of the context in which Raitu Bandhu was announced. So this is in the run-up to the 2019 general elections, which happened in May. So Raitu Bandhu, which basically loosely translates to farmer's friend, was the first of this kind of scheme. In the sense, state governments and others were thinking about how to address issues in agricultural productivity or profitability. So one of the things that came up here was that why don't we give a cash transfer to landowners, and we'll give it as a link to land size, which is something that no other scheme has tried even after Raitu Bandhu. So this it comes out about a year before the general elections, and as soon as this is announced, soon after, the Telangana government sort of announces an early elections in the state, and in December 2018 they have an election. And as soon as that election is over, many other state governments start announcing the similar kinds of schemes of slightly smaller magnitudes. And then eventually in February 2019, the PM Kisan scheme also is announced. So prior to the Raitu Bandhu announcement, there's an interesting sort of program that goes on in Telangana for a 3-month period in late 2017. There's a land records updation project where revenue officers are going village to village and actually verifying documents and then recording who owns how much land, and they also sort out various other issues in terms of succession and other things. And then eventually these landowners are recorded in a central database, and then they issue land passbooks to all of these people who own these lands. And this is not only for agricultural land. Almost all kinds of land in the state was digitized. Land records were digitized in this form. So Raitu Bandhu essentially was providing a 4,000 rupee per acre per season transfer to agricultural landowners. So this is happening twice. Once in the Rabi, once in the Kharif season, once before the Kharif season begins, and once before the Rabi season begins. So this amount has now been increased. I think it's 5,000 since June 2019. So what are the features of Telangana? I mean, there's something just to keep in mind that Telangana is a new state. it was formed in June 2014. It's bordered by Maharashtra, Chhattisgarh, Andhra Pradesh, and Karnataka. It's important to know this because we use a border design, and we'll come to a map also, which will give you a sense of that. And it's an agricultural state. A majority of the labor force is employed in agriculture. The major crops are rice, cotton, maize, moong, tuor, and chilies. And the other thing to remember here is that this is again agricultural census data, which tells you that in terms of landholding sizes, 89% of Telangana's landholdings, operational landholdings, are small and marginal. That is, they're smaller than 5 acres of land. This is important because the transfers are land size linked. So we'll come to that. So just to give you a quick explanation of what the land records updation program was all about, it was essentially these revenue officers would go village to village, verify ownership claims, update records for succession, correction of records, names and things, etc., and also distinguish which kinds of land were there in the village revenue area. And then in terms of coverage, it was a fairly wide coverage. 86% of all types of land in Telangana were verified between September and December 2017. And then, surprisingly, out of 95% of the land that was verified, only 5% was disputed. I mean, that which was under litigation or some sort of more elaborate process had to be there. So the outcome of this whole thing was basically they issued these Pattadar passbooks, which records the amount of land the person owns, the extent, the kind of land, and the location of the land that they own. And this became the basis for the Raitu Bandhu transfers, which is a program that was announced later. So, what is the Raitu Bandhu? What was the objective? What did the government say they wanted to do with a scheme like this? Is that, one is that they wanted to provide input support, which is timely support, right? They wanted to give it at a time during sowing so that people would have enough capital to, purchase certain inputs. And this would reduce the kind of indebtedness that you would see at that time where you had short-term, borrowing to overcome capital costs. And the larger objective was to improve productivity in agriculture. So, one thing to remember here is when we talk about land owning farmers or landowners, if you don't own land but you're cultivating land, or if you're landless, and basically even if you're cultivating land, you won't have any benefits coming to you. It will go only to the person who owns the land. So tenant farmers are, by design excluded, and this is something that has been, talked about within Telangana, and a lot of disagreement about why the scheme had to be designed this way. And in terms of the size of the scheme, it's a very large scheme. I mean, it's a very, very lavish scheme. 12,000 crores in a state budget is a very large amount. I think it's about 7% of the state budget or something. It's a fairly lavish amount. In terms of, so there are some things to remember here. The first transfer was not done through direct benefit transfer kind of thing. It was done through checks. So there was actually physical checks distribution happening on the ground. It's important because in the transfer later on you'll see that there's some spread out in when the transfers are recorded. That's because there is a sort of administrative delay in how the transfers are given in the first round. In the second round, there's largely a move to direct benefit transfers, but there are some teething issues there as well. But in large part, it goes in a direct benefit transfer. And broadly, it's the average landholding size. If you do some back of the envelope calculations from what's been transferred, is 2.5 acres, and average amount received is 9,974. And there's some more data on this, in another paper, but this is broadly giving you a sense of what the kind of transfers were. So I'll just quickly explain the design, the natural experiment design. So what we are doing is basically this. Okay, so there are these green districts here, which are all the districts in Telangana. These are where the scheme has been implemented. These are the treatment districts, and all the gray districts around, which is Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, and Karnataka, are the districts where there's no such scheme in operation. So, and the white regions are the ones which we're not including. For instance, Chhattisgarh is something that we haven't included. There was some lack of data in some parts, so we couldn't include that part. So, and the treatment period we're looking at is May 2018 to April 2019. Okay, why this period is because February, as I said, February 2019, PM Kisan is announced, and then transfers of that sort, other transfers come in, which will actually contaminate our control regions, right, and the treatment area. So to avoid that, we've restricted our treatment period till April 2019. In terms of pre-period, we go back till November 2017, some sort of a reasonable back and going back in history, right? So, so that's the broad sense of the design. In terms, yeah. So the data we're using is the CMI CPDX database. So it's we get monthly and income and consumption data for over 2 lakh households nationwide, right? And so it allows us to do a panel data. We can approach it as panel data because we can track a set of households over time. And this data is particularly popular in recent times with especially with analysis where short-term analysis and analysis on COVID, for instance, where data was really something that was missing. And so we use about from November 2017 to April 2019 is where our mean estimation is done, but we also use some more data for our placebo regressions and other robustness that we'll present later. So just to sort of quickly, so there are some imagination, not imagination. There are some other ways in which small and marginal farmers, organized farmers, agricultural laborers are defined in other data sets. For instance, NSSO and various others. So I just sort of quickly explain what they mean in this in CMI's data and how, and give you a sense of whether what we are doing is making sense or not in terms of whether we are seeing what we are hoping to. So the government transfers that CMI records is on the income side, right? So in the income data, they record government transfers. So there is, it includes only direct benefit transfers. It doesn't include pensions, doesn't include salaries of government employees, and it doesn't include MJ and REJ wages, right? So that's clear. So what we see there is direct benefit transfers of any kind, right? So just to put that on the table. And the other thing is, what is the small and marginal farmer? So generally in agricultural censuses or NSSO, it's usually there is a land size kind of definition. So here they don't really explicitly do that as a land size definition, but it's more like whether there is largely subsistence farming with occasional surplus is what the broad definition is. And for organized farmers is basically people who are producing for commercial purposes for sale, right? So there's a difference there, and we'll see that. I'll show you a graph after this which will give you some sense that okay, this seems reasonable. And agricultural laborers are largely landless, and just to remember that these definitions are for individuals, right? So these individuals are sorted into these groups, and then households, when households are formed, it will be mixed. So that, and we are using the household data. So there could be a case where there will be an agricultural laborer inside an organized farmer family or a small and marginal farmer family. So these are some things that you'll have to keep in mind while you look at the data. Right. So this is just a quick it's a timeline of the transfers as well. It gives you a sense of what happened when, and also what the magnitude of these transfers were. First, just to give you a sense, so the y-axis is basically the government transfers in thousands of rupees, and the x-axis is basically months, right? So this is the period spanning what we are looking at, November 2017 to April 2019, right? So December 2017 is when the land records updation program survey ends, right? That's when the survey ends. Then February 2018 is when the Raitu Bandhu scheme is announced in the budget of the Telangana state government. And the dark red line, the vertical line you see, is when the Raitu Bandhu transfers are beginning to be released. This is again, as I told you earlier, these are physical transfers, right? So checks are being distributed from village to village, right? So you can see that the bulk of transfers, the first transfers, were realized or at least recorded in the CMI data by June 2018. You can see a bulk of those being recorded there. And the second set of transfers happened just before the elections in December 2018. In November 2018, you get a bulk of transfers there. That's one story. So the important thing to note here is that in terms of large transfers, you can see that I've given a line there called 4,000 rupee dashed line at the bottom, which tells you that if you have 1 acre of land, you would receive a 4,000 rupee transfer, right? I mean, you could, if you have more than that or less than that, you'll get a proportional amount, but that's just an indicator. So you see that there were no large transfers before May 2018, in Telangana in the government transfers variable, right? So there's clearly something happening, which the data is capturing, right? And this is something that we see, which has been announced, talked about. So this is some sort of validation that okay, the data is capturing the fact that government transfers actually happened. So the other thing, other aspect of it we can talk about is that broadly, are these categories doing what they're saying they're doing, right? So organized farmers are generally larger farmers, and they're producing for the market, and you see that they tend to receive larger transfers. As you can see, the red dots, they're generally focused on the higher side of the distribution. So you find that okay, these are larger farmers receiving large transfers. So that's something that sort of intuitively makes sense that okay, if you have more land, so you receive more transfers. And the other thing that's happening here is that the small and marginal farmers are actually a very large group in terms of landowners, right? So as I said, there were 89% of the agricultural census data. So you see that most of the graph is basically blue, which tells you that small marginal farmers were the most frequent to receive transfers within Telangana. And agricultural laborers, some of them did receive transfers because they may own small marginal lands here and there. So you see that the yellow dots are infrequent and towards the lower end mostly, except a few cases which probably are because they're in mixed households. So that's broadly the kind of sense of whether the data is actually capturing what's going on out there, and it's sort of convincing to us. So just to give you a sense of the variables that we are doing, we use the total consumption expenditure variable, which is there in the CPHS data, and then for all our estimations, we also present consumption expenditure in rupees, but also log. Most of our estimations are in log. So we also have a log of consumption expenditure, and we sort of create these categories called good consumption, bad consumption, in probably better ways of saying it. But the idea is that consumption that is generally considered productive and helpful, as opposed to liquor, BDs, intoxicants of various kinds, which are broadly categorizing as bad, mainly because there's some debate within this cash transfer literature that do people misuse the money that they receive. So we want to sort of verify that as well. The other thing that we're using is a borrowing from bank variable, which is a 0-1 variable. We don't know how much people are borrowing, but we know whether they borrowed or not, and from which sources, for what purposes, and various things. So we also have a borrowing for productive purposes, broadly for business or investment. So that's another variable that we're looking at. And I think these last three variables will get to. Yeah, it's basically these are dummy variables for the difference in difference estimation, which Sawan will sort of talk about next. Yeah.
Thank you, Abhishek. So the empirical specification is pretty straightforward. We are following difference in differences. So the model that you see is YIT and the YIT, which is representing the redundant side, which is comprising of two variables majorly, which will be capturing. One is logarithm of consumption expenditure, and second will be borrowing from bank. So I represents the households, as Abhishek has said, that it is household level analysis that we are doing, and T is the month in which the transfers or the month in which we are looking at. So Telangana is, if the household belongs to Telangana, 1 is the value of the variable and 0 otherwise. Raitu Bandhu is if the transfer via Raitu Bandhu happened, because as you know that from May 2018 till April 2019 is when the transfers happened. So that time frame will keep this variable Raitu Bandhu as 1, otherwise it will be remaining 0. The important variable that will be capturing is the interaction of Telangana times Raitu Bandhu transfers. So beta 3 is the coefficient that we'll be looking at, which is basically saying that if the household belonged to Telangana and post Raitu Bandhu, whether there was a change in consumption expenditure or borrowing or not is what we'll be capturing. Obviously, it would require a lot of control. So we are controlling for inflation here. We are controlling for income of the households. We are controlling for household fixed effect, because there's a lot of unobserved heterogeneity that they could exist, and because it's about crop cycle can be involved. So we have to take care of month fixed effect. Month fixed effect is basically taking care of all those concerns regarding agricultural productivity and the outcomes of those lines. So that is the design. But before we actually start showing the results to you, there are a lot of descriptives that we really wish to show to make sure that whether the difference in differences Sutwa assumptions are valid or not. So Yeah, next slide, Abhishek. So yeah, again, summary statistics is what is the most important thing that we feel here to understand. So what we do is, no, go back. Okay, so we are showing two halves. You understand? On the left side, you would see Telangana state. On the right side is neighboring states. As I said, Telangana is the treatment group and neighboring states is the control group. Within Telangana, we have bifurcated into two parts. Above is before Raitu Bandhu and from May 2018 when the Raitu Bandhu transfers happened. What you need to focus on here are the blue things that I'm showing here. So look at the consumption expenditure blue part, which is N is saying the number of households, mean is the amount of consumption expenditure in rupees. So it is 10,806 rupees with some standard deviation. Just above on the same lines on Telangana before Raitu Bandhu, you would see it was 8538 rupees. So there's a substantial increase in consumption expenditure for sure. On the neighboring side, state side also you would see there is an increase. But whether the difference is significant or not is what we will check in the next slide. What is important to see is, hold on, Abhishek. What is important to see is the government transfer variable, which Abhishek showed in the scatter plot also before. But I wanted to show in means. Telangana state, look at the government transfers before Raitu Bandhu, you would see it is 270 rupees on an average for the households. And look at the jump it has post Raitu Bandhu. From 270, it jumps to 2030 rupees. Similarly, for bank borrowings, you would see that there is a jump from 0.11, which is, as Abhishek said, is a 0-1 variable. So around 11% of the farming community were borrowing from bank. And post Raitu Bandhu, you would see 54% of them are borrowing. On the neighboring side, you would see these are not changing. So and this is just simple means that we are trying to show. We will also do a quick DID without fixed effect so that people are also agreeing that there's no play going on here. So on the next slide. Yeah, so look at the two variables that we want to talk about. Log of consumption expenditure. Pre, the value was 9. Post, it was 9.25. So there is an increase. In neighboring states, also there is an increase. But if you look at the first difference value and the T-stat, it is huge as compared to the T-stat for the neighboring state. And therefore, the difference in difference value is highly significant for the log consumption expenditure. Coming to the borrowing from bank, you would see there is a huge increase in the borrowing happening in Telangana versus neighboring state. There's no significant change happening. With the T stats or the P value is insignificant, and the difference in difference value that you would see here is highly significant. So these are just raw DID estimate that we want to show before we actually delve it deeper to tell you that if we apply fixed effects and the controls, whether the real effect is happening or not. And that is what we will show in the next slides. But before we do that, we also wanted to show whether before applying the DID parallel trends are existing or not. So once again, this is just a descriptive plot. This is not the event study that we would show in the later post regression. What we are trying to show here is something very simple. On the left side, you would see consumption expenditure. On the right side, you would see bank borrowing. Just see in the pre-period that the vertical red line is showing May 2018 on May 2018, which is the time that Raitu Bandhu transfers happened. The red line is the treatment group, which is in the bottom before Raitu Bandhu. And look at the change that happens post Raitu Bandhu, wherein from September onwards, it is actually overcoming the consumption expenditure of the neighboring states. Similarly, on the borrowing side, you would see as soon as Raitu Bandhu kicks in, people start borrowing for betterment or from the formal sources to probably build up more capital, and you would see a huge spike which continues forward in the time for the treatment group, which is the Telangana farmers. But this is again mean values that we're trying to show, but it also is indicative that on an average there has been a change that we can visibly see here. So yeah, next slide. Yeah, so this is the main result that we wanted to talk about. I would go a little slow because this is a big table and there are 8 columns. But what you need to understand is the first 4 columns is talking about the first variable, consumption expenditure, and the last 4 columns, 5 to 8, is talking about the bank borrowing. Let me first talk about the first 4 columns, consumption expenditure. It's a log value. So in aggregate, when we say aggregate, that which means we are talking about all the three communities of farming that are present in the CMI database: small and marginal farmers, organized farmers, and agricultural farmers, laborers taken together. We are finding that the interaction coefficient, you look at only the blue and the red coefficients, others are obviously control variables like inflation is there, month fixed price is there. In all of the models, you would find that we have controlled for all the control variables. What you find is in column one, there is a 11.9 percentage significant increase in the consumption expenditure of the farmers staying in Telangana post Raitu Bandhu. If we bifurcate this aggregate into small and marginal farmers, we see that it is mainly driven by small and marginal farmers. The coefficient of organized farmers is insignificant. And that is where we come in to tell that if a general broad-based reform is being applied, does it help the overall community? What we're finding is organized farmers are not responding. Why they're not responding? A very simple reason could be, I mean, the money that they're getting, which is 4,000 rupees per acre, is pretty much very low from what they're already spending. So this money is basically not being helped, not being useful for them in increasing the consumption expenditure, because they're already consuming at a much higher level. On the contrary, agricultural laborers, because they don't own the lands, they are not receiving the money directly, and neither do we find there's a spillover happening from smaller marginal farmer or organized farmers to agricultural laborers, and therefore they are not receiving the money, and they are not getting benefited, and the consumption expenditure is actually not significantly increasing for these people, while for small and marginal farmers are the most responding. So that is about the consumption expenditure part. The interesting part is the borrowing part, wherein once again you would see that the 41.1 percentage points changed increase in the borrowing for the Telangana households post Raitu Bandhu as compared to the controlled border districts. And again, it is mostly being captured by small and marginal farmers, but this is also being driven by organized farmers. And this is where it becomes interesting, that because these same organized farmers were not responding in terms of consumption expenditure, but the same money is being used by these farmers for borrowing more, because they want to probably use this regular money that you would be getting to probably build up more capital, because the borrowing is happening from the formal sources, while agricultural laborers are again not getting benefited even in the borrowing side. So what we're trying to say is, same scheme meant for the farming community. You would have seen what Abhishek said, that the purpose of the scheme was to help farmer farming community as a whole. But is it helping everybody? Is the answer is no, is what we're trying to say by this particular thing. So once again, it's a DID result, and therefore it's important to show whether the parallel trends exist in terms of event study design, and that's what we show in the next slide. So yeah, so pretty much what we see is, on the left side we are showing consumption expenditure, and we find that there is no significant difference in the pre-period. The interesting part is it still doesn't spike up at once after the transfers happened in May 2018. It still takes 2 or 3 months. There could be multiple reasons. One reason that we find is most relevant is because the money, as Abhishek said, was transferred in the form of checks, not direct benefit transfers, and therefore it took some time for people to go to the bank, take that money out of the bank, and then eventually consume that. So it took some months, but then once it started, you will see that it is constantly increasing. On the contrary, the borrowing value, you will see that it keeps on increasing significantly, while in the pre-period, mostly, I would say, it is insignificant. There are some errands here and there, but then it is mostly insignificant. The pre-period, the difference between the treatment and the control group, is what we are trying to show via this event study coefficient plots. So which is basically to say that the Sutu assumptions more or less are in place. But still, if there are any concerns regarding the control group, we will take care in the robustness checks. But yeah, so what we saw in the main results first was the both the results are mainly driven by the small and marginal groups. So what we do now is we further delve deeper within the small and marginal groups and do a quantile regression. So at 25th percentile of consumption expenditure within small and marginal farmer, do we see the same thing happening or not? At 50th percentile and 75th percentile. And the same thing we do for borrowing from bank in the last 3 columns also. So what you would see is all the interaction coefficients are positive and significant, which is fair. But what is interesting to note here is the change in the coefficients. You would see that the bottommost quartile is responding the most. 16.2 percentage, which reduces to 12.9, which reduces further to 9.4%, which is also, which again is substantiating to our study, because the person who is spending in the 75 percentile in the smaller marginal regime is probably closer to the organized farmers. And we showed in the main result that organized farmers were not responding. So therefore, you would see that the higher the income already of the farmer is, or the higher consumption already of the farmer is, they are probably not responding that highly. But the smaller marginal farmers who belong to the lower quartiles were responding the most. On the contrary, in the borrowing, the story reverses, which again is corroborating to the point that we made for the organized farmers, because we said again the 75 percentile of the smaller marginal farmers, which is closer to organized farmers, are responding the most in building the capital, because probably they are not using the money as a consumption expenditure, but they are probably using that money as a loan repayment, or taking more loans from the formal sources, and using that as a kind of monthly installments to repay for the future. So that is the heterogeneity analysis within the smaller marginal farmer that we wanted to show by this figure. Another concern that can come up is whether the money was used constructively or not. That's what we show in the next table. So as Abhishek explained, we divide the consumption into two parts: good consumption, which is basically comprising of whether the money was spent on food, health, petrol, diesel, constructive purposes. So we find that there is a positive and significant value for that. Bad consumption is not significant, which means that the money received was probably not just splurged around on intoxicants or cigarettes or BDs. On the contrary, when we look at the borrowing from different sources, once again we find a positive story here. We find that the money was the borrowing from money lender, which is at a higher interest rate, is not increasing. Similarly, money from relatives or friends or self-help groups, there's no significant change. In fact, there's a decrease on the other side. But as we showed in the previous slide, that the money borrowing from banks have increased, and within the bank, when the money is being borrowed, CMI also asks to the household whether the money, if it is borrowed from a particular sources, was it borrowed for a productive or a constructive purposes or not. So we have created this variable productive purposes, which is basically saying whether the money was used for business purposes or investment purposes, and we're finding that it is also positive and significant. Just trying to show that overall the scheme was helping to the farming community, although not helping everybody, but when it was helping, it was constructively, the money was used constructively by the farmers, and it was not splurged around in bad consumption or in bad borrowing. So that is about it. We do a lot of robustness check because there could be a lot of concerns regarding the border district controls being the right measure or not. So we construct a synthetic control. We take whole India as a control group, and within that we match the demographic variables with Telangana as a treatment, and the consumption of the rest of the India being matching in these time frame, again using the CMI data. And then we find that once we create a synthetic control shown by the dotted red lines, you would see that there is a sudden increase in the consumption expenditure, and similarly you would find there's an increase in the borrowing behavior also. So just another way, using the Abadi et al. Knowledge of synthetic controls, we create and we show that even if a synthetic Telangana has been created, taking the rest of the country as a control group, we find the results are pretty much standing like we have in the regression. So that is one. Next, robustness, we do bunch of robustness checks, which is summarized in this table. I'll go slow and explain this. So column 1 and 2 is basically showing a placebo 2016-17. What does it mean? So there could be questions coming up in people's mind that, oh, it is a farming money that could have happened. Kharif crop comes at a particular time, Rabi crop comes at a particular time, and probably the months that you are studying are the months where you would find that the money from the crop has come, and therefore the expenditure has increased, and therefore the borrowing would have changed. What we do is we do a placebo. We take exactly same months, exactly 1 year before, when obviously the Raitu Bandhu would not have taken place either in treatment or in control. And what we find is if it was just a crop cycle, or if it was just a happenstance, it would have happened 1 year before also, right? But we are finding that both the coefficients are not significant. Second, placebo check is LRUP. LRUP, as Abhishek explained, is Land Records Updation Program, which happened somewhere in December 2017. So people would have questions coming in mind that, oh, it is probably just because of the land record being updated. Therefore, people thought that now they have passbooks in their hand and they could have shown that passbooks and got more borrowing, or that passbook is also standing a confidence in the farmer's mind that now he would eventually receive the money and he would spend. We would say no, all that is not happening. It is only when the money is being received in the Raitu Bandhu, then we would see the expenditure and borrowing changing. And therefore, both the red coefficient showing that it's not significant. Finally, we do coarsen exact matching, where we match the treatment and the control group and make them more closer based on the household size and income. And we find that with the proper matching, we find that the coefficients, which if you remember was 11.9, has actually increased to 12.8 percentage, and this was 41 before. It has increased to 43.8 percentage points increase. So better control group or better matching of the control group is actually improvising our results, just showing that the identification strategy is pretty strong. Next slide. Finally, we also do randomized inference, which is another technique to basically say that whether it is just happening by luck of chance. So what we do is, we have households in the treatment, we also have the households in the control group. We randomize it, and we generate 10,000 such randomized samples and run the same specification 10,000 times. And what you are seeing on the left side is basically talking about the consumption expenditure value coefficients, interaction coefficients of this that you would get. And the red line, vertical line, is the actual coefficient that we receive. What we can see is the actual coefficient is much farther away from the randomized value. It's just trying to say you that if it would have happened just randomly, our line would have probably lined somewhere here. But there's a huge significant difference between the actual value and the randomized coefficients, both for consumption expenditure and for borrowing that we are finding. So, I mean, we are doing multiple robustness check and finally finding that the identification strategy is pretty strong and the results are pretty robust in multiple senses. So yeah, next slide. Finally, those are the results. We also discuss in terms of a lot of questions, because we have presented it at multiple places and there were a lot of questions because raised by development economists in terms of it could probably would have been just because of seasonality or festival. So Abhishek comes from Telangana state and he also had this question in mind. Oh, it could just be because of that festival that happens at that point of time, and therefore probably to overcome that kind of concerns, we did a placebo check, as I showed the results to you, that just exactly 1 year before, when the festival happens at the similar time, you would see that there is nothing. It is basically coming from the Raitu Bandhu transfers, is what we show by the placebo changes. People can ask that, oh, there are a lot of loan waivers being given by the state governments, and it was an election year, so probably the Telangana government would have given a lot of loan waivers, and that is why probably the farmers would have started spending more. We say we can probably show in the appendix that that there was no budgeting of loan waivers in Telangana compared to the other states, wherein there were a lot of loan waivers being given in Maharashtra, Karnataka, and others. So in a different sense, our results are basically the underestimate, because the loan waivers were given in the control state but not in the treatment, and still we are finding that there's an increase in consumption and borrowing happening. So that and third concern that we also cater to is influence of elections. This is asked so many times to us. Oh, it was the election year, December 2018, 2020. Yeah. So elections were coming up. So probably the government was giving money to the people, and therefore that particular money is received from the government at the time of election is what people would have spent, and their consumption expenditure increased. But again, we counter to that by saying that, see, the most populous group and the poorest are the ones who receive the most money in such kind of election transfers. And the poor and the poorest of the groups in the farming community, as you know, are the landless farmers who are the agricultural laborers. And what we find is that there is no significant change in their consumption expenditure. So if it's just the election money that would have caused the change, then probably agricultural laborers would have benefited the most, but they are not. Also, what we find is the effect of the Raitu Bandhu is not momentary. We extend the data and we find that there is a persistent effect. And therefore, we cannot just talk about one particular election in one particular year that would have caused this change. So this is in terms of discussion. Finally, talking about the policy implications of our study. So as we said, I mean, governments frequently carry out, I mean, we probably hear of another scheme coming up every new month, either from the state government or from the central government. So generally, they are mostly broad-based interventions. What we need to understand is not all households are subjected to intervention, which are subjected to intervention, or which government want to help, are actually benefiting from the intervention. Like we showed that actually the agricultural laborers who are committing the most suicides should be the ones who should have been helped by the scheme, but actually there's no positive spillovers happening to them, and it stays or limits mostly to the small and marginal farmers only. So basically, social planners should basically, before launching such schemes, should do a more rigorous um, study, and that probably will also explain how the scheme will eventually work in the future. Also, one important thing is, like we said, that there are two interventions happening. One is clearing of the land records, and another is actual transfers happening. So our verdict is, in developing countries, basically implementation matters. Promises alone will probably not matter. People need to have money in hand. Only then they would start spending. Consumption smoothing kind of concepts are more developed country concepts. In developing countries, they generally don't work. Is also one of the implications that we are finding. We've also, it's still a working paper. We are working on it since quite a long time now, and we want to build on it. And therefore, any comment, suggestion, I'm sure Professor Phanindra will be providing us. But in audience also, if you have, please note down post any questions. Suggestions are most welcome. If you cannot do it right now, you can always mail us. It will be we'll be delighted to hear your comments and suggestions taking forward. So with that, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for the lovely presentation. I think it gave us a lot of insight on the nuanced impact of such a important scheme that the government has introduced and can be applied to other contexts as well. I see that you have some questions in the Q&A box, so I think you can address that either by typing in the box, or you can address them out loud as well, verbally as well. And then following that, we can start with the discussion as well.
Yeah, so I'll just take the first question. I think is answered through the specification. We do control for inflation, so even if the data is nominal, it's taken care of in the estimates. That's from Chris Matten. And Dia Uday is asking, did borrowing overall go up in the state of Telangana, or just did formal borrowing go up? Are the households in Telangana you look only at farm? Yeah, we're only looking at farm and agricultural related households. But yeah, the overall borrowing does go up, but it's all explained by the formal borrowing increases. So that's
it's probably what Dia is trying to ask is, did only formal borrowing go up, or so, like I think I showed in the table that borrowing from money lenders, borrowing from, I mean, the sources which were of higher interest rates. I mean, borrowing from banks are the ones that obtained at the cheapest rates, and therefore you have to always show some kind of collateral kind of thing to get that kind of borrowing. So therefore, it is more formal borrowing, and therefore the money received is also used for constructive purposes. So what we are trying to show is not every borrowing is increasing, but more of formal borrowing only is going up. To answer Dia's question.
Yeah, and Mayank is asking whether it's the observation is household, so that's clear. That's just using household data. And okay,
The difference across quantiles, I think I showed they're all triple stars. So they're significant at at 1%. So I don't know what exactly what meant.
What he means by that, I don't know. Yeah.
Finally, Abhishek is asking, is it possible that sudden spikes or troughs in savings bank interest rates might also be driving an increase in O? That is interesting.
We haven't haven't checked that.
That's an interesting input, Abhishek. So Abhishek, I think, is also our colleague from IMA. So we'll discuss that. That's a good point, Abhishek. I think we'll have to check for that, and we'll get back to you. Thank you. So I think that answers, Pritha, all the Q&A questions.
Yes, thank you so much. So I think for now the questions have been answered. Dr. Phanindra, we can start with your discussion. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. And at the very beginning, I would like to thank CMIE, Dr. Mahesh Vyas, and Dr. Prita Joseph, opportunity to review, read the paper. I have enjoyed reading the paper fully, and it is a very interesting paper. So we have prepared one PPT. Maybe I can share and speak. It is little unstable. I think I can still. Is it visible now?
Yes, doctor.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You can put the video off if the internet is.
Once again, I am repeating. Sorry. Yeah. Once again, I am repeating. I have read the paper fully with full interest and great attention on the contents. This is a very interesting paper, and personally, I have learned many things from this paper. And after reading, one impression is coming to me. It is not easy to write this type of paper within 1 month or 2 months. I think authors have taken long time creating an impression on me. So I think one presenter, and it was nice listening to this interesting also. Now, without the name of this, without repeating what Abhishek and have already spoken, have presented, I'll just go through some important points. Just to repeat again, this paper is examining responses of different land holders to mainly two government interventions, land ownership assurance and unconditional cash transfers to farmers in the state of Telangana. And the paper is using CMI's consumer database also level. So overall, paper is very interesting. Generally, what happens in case of impact analysis of any government policy, researchers face lots of problems, particularly data constraints. Useful required data are not available because of a small time period or lack of data on relevant study variables. But in this case, authors have used available data in a very systematic way that I could understand after reading the paper. So paper is well organized into sections, subsections, step by step, well written, having findings are having a very useful policy implications. The strongest point of the paper is the study objective is properly examined, that econometric model estimations like DIDS, quarter level are very interesting. Discussions on estimated results are also nice and consistent with the study objective. I enjoyed reading literature review also, touching upon team-wise literature review is touching on 4 issues like direct cash transfer, unconditional cash transfer schemes, policy reforms, government interventions, property rights, and security, then cash transfers and targeting of beneficiaries. These are very interesting. So now with these few words, let me go to some points, my observations. On paper, on page number 3, related to footnote number 2, 3, and 4, which are basically CMIE's descriptive definitions on small and marginal farmers, organized farmers, and agricultural laborers. These are nice, interesting. But I was looking, is it possible to give how state of Telangana is defining these holders in terms of land size, along with this descriptive definition? I think that will be nice. You need not explain so much, but by giving a one or small one or two footnote or endnote will be useful. You have already given reference to this table A1. I think that data may be given some reference. Now, in the presentation, Abhishek has shown some diagram. This diagram map is showing border districts of Telangana as well as neighboring states. But in the paper, this diagram map is not given. So while paper is comparing responses of households of border districts of Telangana with the border districts of neighboring states, taking a treatment group and a control group, I was looking for some information, how many districts of border states like Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh are included. It may not be possible to give the names of districts, but I think it is possible to give the number of districts. That will give information how many districts are covered. So that is small, but I feel very useful information for the study. And on page 15 of your full paper, you have this sentence that you have claimed that the major change in consumption and borrowing behavior of households is due to Rathi Bandhu transfers amount. So I feel it is a very strong claim, but interestingly, using your sample data, sample results, you have analyzed, you have written that this statement is true. Various additions, nice results, data evidences you have given. This is one strong point, but I was actually looking for this issue. The Rathi Bandhu transfer to these farmers amount is not big. From our general economic information, economic knowledge, we know that a particular household can get income from secondary occupations like doing some new business or getting new job. It may be for the household head or other family members. That extra income or income from secondary sources can change drastically the consumption behavior and borrowing behavior of households. So I fully understand in your sample data, this information you may not be having, but somehow if you can gather some micro level data from household, I think this my question could have been answered or can be answered. Now, you have spoken in the regression model. Total consumption expenditure has been divided into two parts: bad consumption and good consumption. In the good consumption category, you have included only mainly three items: food items, healthcare services, and energy, petrol and diesel expenses. As we know, expenditures on education, mainly children education and skill development, these are also having a very important impact, positive impact on consumption behavior as well as borrowing behavior. I was thinking if you have data, why this cannot be included. So you may get a better result and a better explanation. That is my idea. And this number 5 point, in your regression models, yeah, I must say, although you have used a lot of econometric estimations like DID, difference in differences, quartile level regressions, whatever you have written, it is easy to understand. One who cannot understand econometric results or econometric model also can understand if somebody reads starting to ending. That is one positive point. Now, this issue in your regression models, only to these data tables 4, 5, 6, 7, and also A3, B3. You included these two variables, inflation and income. Your discussions are mainly concentrating on main variable, Raitu, Bandu, and this farmers land holding categories. I can see less discussions are on inflation and income. Maybe somehow you can see wherever this can be considered, included with proper explanations. And I think please see some, while reading, I found some typing mistake. Maybe you can check again. Since we know every study suffers from some limitations, I think clearly some limitations or constraint of the present study can be outlined. Of course, you have mentioned future directions in the last section that can also be given as some limitations. And since your study findings are having very useful policy implications, I think you may have to strengthen this issue, policy implications. Whatever you have, take 2 or 3 main findings and try to analyze these policy implications. And since your analysis is related to Telangana state, but now similar scheme is available in other states and also at the all India level. This is a Prime Minister Kisan scheme. So your results are not only useful for Telangana, but it is also useful for all over the country. That is one thing. So that policy implication analysis, either it can be given in the last section or if possible as a separate section. My only concern is paper is a little long, and if you are publishing in some journal, they may not allow so much details. Huh? So for the reader, whatever you have written, so much details are there, very nice, step by step you have written. I feel good, but journals may not accept. Huh? And this, since your analysis is related to responses of households, in your result analysis, response or responding. But as we know, when we speak respond or responses, it can be in terms of number, negative or zero. So that is why wherever you have written, try to make it clear. Policy response is positive, policy response is negative. Clearly, like for small farmers, small and marginal farmers, if they are responding to this consumption, increase in consumption behavior, so going in positive direction, or if it is big farmers are not responding to consumption expenditure, so it may be zero. So I was looking for this kind of clear responses. So you can, I think this is minor, but you can have a look. And these directions, whatever you have added, I have just added a few more points. Especially what is happening in Indian agriculture. Many crops in India are facing this declining property and rising cost of cultivations. And in the face of this kind of problem, so one can also analyze how this type of policy interventions can solve some of the problems or can reduce some of the related to agriculture development in. So, and you have analyzed only for land holding categories. I think similar exercise, similar analysis can also be done across social groups or across regions of the country, regions within particular state. Then so many dimensions are there. So with these few words, I congratulate all three authors, Abhishek, Sawan, and Phanindra. And thank you for the opportunity to CMIE.
Thanks a lot, Professor Goyari. I think that was very insightful. I think all points are noted by us in terms of whether should be. I mean, we should obviously include education for sure. This is what I'm getting straightforward. Abhishek can obviously add them, and we should explain more on inflation and income variables. Also, policy implications. We should probably add a word on PM Kisan because that is more of a larger scheme, and few silly mistakes that you pointed out in terms of we will obviously improve on that, and also how to write in terms of responses, whether positive, negative, or zero. I think these are very important points that we are learning from you, and we'll take that forward. Thank you. Abhishek, you want to add?
Nothing. Just that one of the things he had said is that I think the state government's definition. I don't know whether they create a definition of their own, but they broadly follow. I mean, like the agricultural census, which has that land size classification. I mean, in reports of the state government, that's what they've been using. But in terms of the transfer, they're basically, say if you have 1 acre of land, you'll get 4,000. If you have 1.5, you'll get 1.5 times of 4,000. So they're transferring literally on exactly how much land you have. So that's what they're following. So even if you have say 0.2 acres, you'll get 0.2 into 4,000 as an amount for transfer. So that's the kind of thing that they're following. And in terms of, you had asked about that alternative income sources, whether we can track it. Actually, CMI income variables are fairly diverse. So we could actually look at other sources of income and what's happening to them during the same period. So it is possible to look at different sources of income and see whether there is some changes in those as well, which you have pointed out. So that's something that we can try and do. Mm, yeah, yeah, and the income. So the only point I'll like to, the income variable is, we tried to explain it, but so it's basically when we use an income variable in the econometric specification, we are taking out the government transfer. I mean, it's income minus the government transfer to sort of not to have a double accounting problem, right? So you exclude it because you want to control for all other income. So that's the one of the things we've done. But yeah, but we'll include a maybe proper discussion about, or a few notes about how we use those variables in the paper.
Yes, so thank you so much for the very holistic and I think definitely useful discussion, Dr. Phanindra. And thank you for the response as well to the presenters. I don't think there are any more questions at this point. We can maybe wait for a few minutes since we have time. But a very big thank you to the presenters and the discussant. I think this was a great session and useful for all participants. And thank you to the audience as well for all the wonderful questions and comments.
If I'm audible and visible, I want to say thank you to the presenters and to the discussant. Thank you very much, Abhishek and Sawan, and thank you, Phanindra, as well.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank
the
you, Mr.
opportunity.
Mahesh, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
All right, I think there are no more questions, so we can bring the session to a close. Thank you so much, everyone, and do join us for our future webinars. And we look forward to having you in your additional research as well. Come back to present as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.